My business partner of 5 years used a copy of my handwriting to borrow $280,000 from 3 investors I had never met. I found out by accident, standing in a hallway I wasn't supposed to be in, watching him laugh on the phone. I stood there for 4 seconds. Then I walked back into my office, sat down under the old lamp on my desk, and opened my laptop like nothing had happened. Let me be specific about what happened next. Not because I want you to feel sorry for me, because I want you to understand exactly how 7 months of patience can undo 5 years of theft. My name is Ryan Foster. I'm 36 years old. Before I tell you what I did in those 7 months, I need to tell you about Derek Cole because everything that happened in that hallway only lands with its full weight if you understand exactly what I believed I had before it. Derek and I met freshman year at Northwestern. He was the guy who could walk into any room and make everyone feel like they'd been waiting for him specifically. He had a way of listening to people that made them feel heard in a way they didn't feel everywhere else fully present. Eye contact, a laugh that arrived at exactly the right moment. I understand now that some of those qualities were genuine and some were learned, and I cannot always tell you which was which. I've stopped trying. I was the other kind of person. The kind who stayed up until 2 a.m. because the campaign concept wasn't landing, and I needed to understand why before I could sleep. The kind who obsessed over the specific word on a billboard because accelerate and advance are not the same thing, and the client deserved to know the difference. The kind who, when a pitch failed, went home and dissected the failure instead of going to the bar. We were, by all external accounts, the perfect partnership. I built the work. He sold the work. I made things worth talking about. He made sure people were talking. For 5 years, I believed that was enough. I believed that trust was its own form of infrastructure, that if the friendship was real, the rest would hold. I was wrong about that. Not about all of it, but about enough. In the 15 years I knew Derek before that Thursday, there were exactly 2 moments where I had felt something not quite right and chosen to explain it away. The first was 7 years in, when a mutual friend mentioned that Derek had told a group of people that a particular brand strategy I'd developed was something we came up with together in a working session. I had developed it alone, on a Sunday afternoon. In my apartment, Derek had not been there. When I mentioned it to him, he said he must have misremembered and laughed it off in the specific way. He laughed things off warmly, self-deprecatingly, in a way that made you feel like pressing the issue would make you the unreasonable one. The second moment was 2 years before the Thursday. A small client, a retail company in Naperville, had mentioned to me that Derek had given them a rate, quote, significantly higher than our standard rate, and had not disclosed the difference. When I asked Derek about it, he said the client had misunderstood the scope, and the invoice reflected the correct amount. I had accepted that explanation because I wanted to accept it. Because accepting that Derek would quietly, quote, above rate, was easier than accepting what it might mean about how he saw the relationship between us. I am telling you this because I want you to understand something specific. I had the information I needed to be suspicious earlier than I was. I chose not to be suspicious because the cost of being suspicious felt higher than the cost of being wrong. This is not stupidity. This is how trust works. And this is exactly what someone running a scheme like Derek's counts on. We launched Prism Creative in a 2-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park. The second bedroom was our office. We had one client, a restaurant group owned by Derek's uncle, and a shared laptop that overheated if you ran more than 4 browser tabs. We slept on an air mattress in the living room for 4 months because neither of us could afford actual furniture yet. We ate cereal for dinner 3 nights a week and called it a lifestyle choice because we were 28 years old and it was easier than admitting we were scared. I'm telling you that part because I want you to understand what I believed about this person. Not abstractly, not as a general principle about trust and friendship. Concretely, specifically, I believed he was the only other human being who knew what those 4 months had cost us. The cold call rejections, The invoices we had to chase for 90 days. The moment we landed our first real client, a regional healthcare network called Mid-States Health, and sat on the apartment floor at midnight eating pizza, we couldn't actually afford, and not saying anything. Just sitting there in the specific silence of people who had made something work against the odds. That was what I believed Derek Cole was to me. Now let me tell you exactly what happened in that hallway. Not the summary version. The version with the weight behind it. It was a Thursday in October. I had come back to the office early from a client lunch that ended faster than expected. The building's elevator was broken. It had been broken for 11 days, which is a detail I remember for no logical reason. And I took the stairs to the third floor. Our conference room had a glass wall facing the hallway, which I had always liked because it made the space feel open and transparent. I now understand that was ironic. Derek was on the phone. He had his back to the glass. I stopped walking because I saw his posture. The specific posture people have when they're saying something they don't want witnessed. His shoulders were low and forward. His free hand was moving through the air, and that gesture he used when he was pleased with something, a slight circular motion like he was rolling out good news. I couldn't hear everything through the glass. The building had good insulation. The words I caught, standing still in the hallway, were these. He hasn't looked at the amended articles. He just signs whatever I put in front of him. The filing is already in with the state. Just give me until the end of Q1. Then a pause, then a laugh. I stood there for 4 seconds. I know it was 4 seconds because I counted later in my head, reconstructing the moment the way you reconstruct a car accident, going back through it in slow motion, looking for the moment before everything changed, as if knowing exactly when the change occurred could somehow undo it. It couldn't, but knowing it mattered anyway. Then I walked past the conference room. I went to my office. I sat down at my desk. Under the old navy blue lamp I'd brought from my college dorm room, the lamp that had been on every desk I'd ever worked at, from the dorm to the Wicker Park apartment to Prism's first real office, and I opened my laptop like I was going to answer emails. I didn't answer any emails. I looked at the screen for 17 minutes without seeing it. At some point, the screensaver activated. I watched it cycle through without any of it registering. Then I got up, told my assistant I needed to check on something downtown, walked to the parking garage, sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel and the engine off, and did not move for another 11 minutes. 28 minutes total. That was how long it took me to make the most important decision of the next 7 months of my life. I want to be precise about what happened in my head during those 28 minutes, because this is the part that determined everything that came after. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I didn't call Derek and demand an explanation. I didn't call a lawyer or a friend or my brother in Seattle. What I did was make a decision, a cold, quiet decision that felt less like an emotion and more like a door closing from the inside. I was going to find out exactly what he had done. All of it. Every document. Every account. Every conversation I hadn't been part of. I was going to understand the complete picture before I showed any reaction at all. Because the moment I confronted Derek without knowing everything, he would know I knew, and everything he hadn't finished doing yet, he would finish doing faster. I started the engine. I drove home. I did not go back to the office that day. That was a Thursday in October. What I'm about to tell you covers the next 7 months. Part 2. Setup. Here is what I was working with on that Friday morning. Derek and I had agreed, when we incorporated Prism Creative, to split the company 50-50. Equal ownership, equal voting rights, equal share of profits and losses. I handled creative direction, brand strategy, client deliverables. Derek handled business development, client relationships, and because I had always genuinely despised the administrative side of running a business, the legal and financial filings. I want to say that again clearly. I handed Derek administrative control because I trusted him and because I hated paperwork. I signed documents he put in front of me without reading them carefully, because that was our arrangement, because we had been friends for 15 years, because the idea that he would put something into those documents that wasn't in my interest belonged to a category of possibility I had not allowed myself to consider. This is not a story about a naive person who deserved what happened. Trusting a 15-year friend with paperwork is not negligence. But I will tell you this. If you are in a business partnership right now, and there is one person who handles the legal and financial documents, and the other person doesn't read them, go read them tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. Whatever you're doing right now can wait. The Friday morning, after the Thursday in the hallway, I did 3 things. First, I went to the county recorder's office and pulled our articles of incorporation and every amendment that had been filed since we incorporated. I told the woman at the counter I was doing a compliance review. She looked at me with the expression county recorder employees use when they've seen this before. A mix of professional neutrality and something that might have been sympathy if sympathy were in her job description. She pulled the documents. I sat in a plastic chair near the window and read all 4. The original articles. 50. Ownership. The First Amendment. Routine. Registered agent update. The Second Amendment. Routine. Address change. The Third Amendment filed 14 months ago. On a Tuesday in August, my signature at the bottom next to Derek's changed the ownership split. My share, 30%. Derek's share, 70%. I read the ownership percentages twice. Then I read the signature line. Then I read the date. I remembered the document Derek had put in front of me 14 months ago. He'd called it a routine administrative update for our insurance filing. I had been in the middle of a campaign presentation crunch for a pharmaceutical client. I had signed it while standing at the copy machine, 2 pages while a client deck printed behind me. I remembered thinking the font on the footer looked slightly different from our usual documents, and then deciding it didn't matter. It had mattered. I put the articles back in the envelope, walked to my car, and sat in the parking structure outside the county building for approximately 6 minutes. I was doing a specific kind of math. Not financial math, not legal math, but the math of reconstructing your understanding of a person. Every interaction for 14 months. The conference calls, the client dinners, the late nights when we'd ordered food and worked through a problem together. 14 months, during which Derek had known that the company we had built together was 70% his by document, 30% mine, and I had not known. I thought about what he had said on the phone. He just signs whatever I put in front of him. I filed it away. I drove back to the office. I said good morning to Derek, like I always said good morning to Derek. He was at the coffee machine. He offered to get me a cup. I said sure. Thanks. He handed it to me and asked if my afternoon meeting had gone well, and I said it had. That was the second thing I did. I decided not to react, not to confront, not to call a lawyer, not to change a single visible behavior, because the moment Derek sensed something had shifted in me, he would accelerate. He had a plan, and it was already moving. I needed to understand its full scope before I disrupted it. I became, for the next 3 months, a very good actor. I'm not proud of it in the theatrical sense. I'm proud of it in the survival sense. The third thing I did that Friday morning was this. I stayed at the office until 11 p.m. and made complete copies of every financial document I had access to. I kept my office door open the whole time, so if Derek passed by, he'd see me working late on the Harmon Foods pitch like I was supposed to be. Every time I heard the elevator, I switched windows on my screen. What I found over the following months? I'm going to give you numbers, because numbers don't lie the way that people do. By November, I had confirmed the ownership split. 30-70 in Derek's favor for 14 months, during which time the company had earned approximately $1.4 million in net profit. Based on the original 50-50 agreement, I had been underpaid by roughly $280,000 in profit distributions alone. That number was calculated by my accountant, not a forensic accountant yet, just my regular personal accountant, who I told I was doing some financial planning. She did the math on a napkin at a coffee shop in Lakeview, and then looked at me and said, "Ryan, this is not a planning conversation, is it?" I told her it wasn't. She told me to call Patricia Holt. That was the first number, $280,000. By December, I found the second one. Derek had opened a secondary business bank account in Prism's name. One I wasn't listed on, one I had never seen a statement for. The account had been opened 11 months prior. There were 3 large wire transfer deposits. $100,000 from a man named Gerald Pittman. $100,000 from a couple named Roy and Connie Marsh. $80,000 from an LLC called Verdant Capital Group, all deposited within a 6-week window in February and March. I had never heard of any of these people. I had never authorized any investor agreements. I had never discussed raising external capital with Derek or with anyone else. But when I dug into the documents associated with these transfers, I found them through a contact at our accounting firm who helped me access records. I technically had a right to access. As a named principal, I found loan agreements, signed loan agreements, authorizing $280,000 in investor financing, both my signature and Derek's on each document. I stared at my own signature for a long time. The specific way I make the capital R in Ryan, a slightly exaggerated loop at the top that I've had since middle school. It was there on the page. I had not written it. That was the second number. $280,000 in fraudulent loans attributed to my name. $280,000 in both directions. Money I should have received. And money I had apparently agreed to borrow from people I had never met. By January, I had the third piece. Our largest client, Sterling Brands, a consumer goods company that represented $1.1 million of our annual revenue. A relationship I had personally pitched and managed for 3 years. The relationship I was most proud of had been receiving weekly calls from Derek. I learned this not from any document, but from a phone call. Sterling's brand manager, Catherine Park, called me on a Tuesday morning to ask, with the careful phrasing of someone who did not want to create a problem, if there was any update on the account management situation. She said Derek had been telling her team for 2 months that I was stepping back from operations due to a health situation and that going forward, she should direct all communications to Derek. I had not stepped back from anything. I had not told anyone I was stepping back from anything. I did not have a health situation. I thanked Catherine. I told her there had been a misunderstanding, and I would follow up. She said, "Ryan, I want you to know that the work has always been yours. The ideas, the strategy, the late nights when something wasn't right and you fixed it. I just want you to know I know that." I thanked her again and hung up, and sat in the Sterling Brands parking lot in my car, with the old navy blue lamp on the passenger seat. I bring it to client sites sometimes. It sounds strange, but it helps me think, an old habit I've never been able to explain to anyone's satisfaction, and I accepted the full shape of what Derek was doing. He wasn't just taking my ownership percentage. He wasn't just borrowing money in my name. He was removing me from the company I had built, piece by piece, in a sequence designed so that by the time I noticed, there would be nothing left to dispute. My clients transferred. My professional relationships reassigned. My signature on debt I hadn't authorized. My ownership percentage diluted until the day he could say, credibly, to any room of people, that Ryan Foster was a minor partner who had stepped away from operations, and the company's growth, the company's reputation, the company's value was Derek Cole's creation. The company would still have my name attached to enough historical work that it looked like mine. I would just have no actual claim to it. I drove home. I called Patricia Holt. Part 3. Escalation. Patricia Holt was 61 years old and had been practicing business litigation for 34 years out of a small office in the Loop. She had 2 partners and a reputation that I was told could be summarized in one sentence: If you have a real case, she will take it. And if you don't, she will tell you in the first 15 minutes. She charged me for the first 15 minutes. Then she asked me to come back the following week with every document I had. She said this with the exact neutral tone of someone who had learned not to telegraph their interest before they'd seen the full picture. I came back the following week with a folder that was 2 inches thick. Let me explain what was in that folder. Because the specificity matters. The amended Articles of Incorporation, with a copy of the original for comparison. A spreadsheet my personal accountant had built showing the profit distribution discrepancy, over 14 months $280,000 in underpaid distributions, line by line, quarter by quarter, the math done 3 different ways to confirm. The secondary bank account statements I had obtained through our accounting firm's records. I was technically a named principal of Prism Creative and had a legal right to the documents, which Derek had apparently not considered when he opened the account, or had considered and decided I would never exercise. Printouts of the 3 investor wire transfer confirmations. The loan agreements with the signatures I had not written. Photographs I had taken with my phone of the original signature comparison documents from the forensic examiner my accountant had quietly connected me with. The email chain between Derek and Sterling Brand's VP, which Catherine Park had forwarded to me after I asked her to keep records. The internal memo about my advisory role transition. The Cole Creative Group domain registration pulled from WHOIS public records. 2 inches. 41 documents. 7 months. Patricia spent 45 minutes reading in silence. The office was very quiet. There was a small plant on the corner of her desk that needed water. I remember noticing this because I couldn't stop looking around the room while she read, looking for something neutral to rest my eyes on, while a stranger read the documentation of the worst 7 months of my professional life. When she finished, she put the last document down and looked at me for a moment before speaking. The signature forgery is the most serious issue, she said, not lawyer language. The language of someone explaining a situation to someone who had not yet understood its full severity. Everything else, the amended articles, the account you weren't listed on these, are serious civil matters. The forgeries are potentially criminal. I said, potentially. She said, I want to bring in a forensic document examiner before we use that word in any formal context. But I've been doing this for a long time. She paused. Has Derek Cole operated a business before Prism Creative? Any partnerships, consulting arrangements, joint ventures? I said he had done some consulting before we started the agency. She wrote that down and underlined it. One more thing, she said. I want you to keep acting like you don't know any of this. Don't confront him. Don't move money around. Don't change anything visible. Don't tell anyone at the company. Can you do that? I told her I had been doing it for 3 months already. She looked at me for a long moment. Good, she said. That's very good. Most people can't. She made a note on her legal pad. I'll be in touch in 2 weeks. What Patricia found over the following weeks. The forensic document examiner confirmed the investor loan signatures were not mine. The pressure patterns, the angle of the pen, the specific way I formed the R in my first name, the forensic examiner, wrote 4 pages on why the document signatures were inconsistent with my known handwriting samples. Not forged badly, she noted. Forged carefully, by someone who had spent time studying how I signed my name, which meant Derek had studied how I signed my name. I'll let you sit with that for a moment. Patricia also discovered, through the investor loan records, that Derek was preparing a 3rd round of financing. The 3 existing investors were from an earlier round. Derek was in active conversations with at least 2 new potential investors about a growth round for Prism, a round in which, according to the pitch documents circulating, both co-founders would serve as personal guarantors. I had not reviewed any of these materials. My projected personal assets were in a pitch deck being sent to strangers. In February, 5 months into the investigation, Patricia's office received a call from a man named Marcus Chen. I need to tell you about Marcus Chen properly, because his presence in this story is not incidental. He is the reason the ending happened the way it did. Marcus Chen was 41 years old, based in Austin, Texas, and had spent the previous 4 years doing something very specific: building a file. His company had been called Meridian Brand Labs. He had been the founder. Derek Cole had come in as a strategic partner and co-investor in year 2 of Meridian's operation. The pattern he described to Patricia was identical to what had happened to me, down to the specifics. The ownership amendment filed while Marcus was too busy to read it carefully. The secondary accounts. The investor money brought in on Marcus's name without his knowledge. The client relationships quietly migrated as Derek prepared a separate entity. And then, when Marcus finally noticed and hired an attorney, he found that he had technically signed documents authorizing everything Derek had done because he, like me, had trusted a partner with the paperwork. Marcus lost $340,000 in equity and 3 years of his professional life. He was offered $40,000 to settle silently. He didn't take it. He didn't take it because he had decided, sitting in a lawyer's office in Austin, looking at documents that proved he had been systematically defrauded by a person he had trusted completely, that if this ever happened to someone else, he wanted to be available as a witness, as a pattern, as evidence that this was not a single incident, but a method. He had been watching Derek carefully since the Meridian situation. When Prism Creative appeared and grew, when Ryan Foster's name started appearing on industry award submissions and Derek Cole's name appeared on the speaking panels, Marcus had recognized the architecture. He had called Patricia because her name appeared in a legal database as having filed a business fraud complaint against a related company name several years prior, a reference he had tracked through public court records. I met Marcus in person in April, at a diner in the West Loop at 8 in the morning. We both came in separate Ubers. Neither of us wanted to be seen entering a building together. We sat in a booth near the window and ordered coffee and didn't speak for a moment. Two people assessing whether the other person was who they seemed to be. He was a quiet man with a very still way of sitting, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from calm but from practice, from having spent years in situations that required him to hear everything before responding to anything. He had brought a folder with color-coded tabs. I had brought a folder with color-coded tabs. We looked at each other's organizational systems for a moment, with the specific recognition of two people who had been running the same kind of operation independently. We swapped folders across the table and read in silence for 20 minutes, while the waitress refilled our coffee twice without us noticing. There was a television above the counter showing local news. The sound turned low, the closed captions running a half-second behind the anchor's mouth. Nobody in the diner was paying attention to it. Everybody was doing the thing that people do in diners in the morning, which is moving through the beginning of a day that will probably be ordinary. Our day was not going to be ordinary. When I finished reading his file, I looked up. He was still reading mine, moving through the pages with the methodical stillness of someone who had read similar documents before and knew exactly what he was looking for. When he finished, he set it down and folded his hands on the table and said, "He told my clients I was having a breakdown. He called it a health situation." I said, "That's the word. He always uses health situation." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He's been doing this to someone else. Right now. Her name is Jade Park. She invested $150,000 in Prism 3 months ago. Derek told her she was becoming a junior partner. He paused. I've been watching the same sequence with her. She's 8 months in. She doesn't know yet. I didn't know about Jade Park. How did you find out about her? I asked. I have a contact in the Chicago marketing world. An executive recruiter who moves people between agencies. She mentioned seeing Jade's name in a Prism.org chart with a new title. I recognized the title structure. He looked at his coffee. Derek gives junior partners a title with the word growth in it. He did the same thing with the person before you. A man in Atlanta named Anthony Greer. 3. There had been 3 people before me. Anthony Greer, in Atlanta. Marcus Chen, in Austin. Me, in Chicago. And right now, 8 months into the same sequence, Jade Park. I looked at Marcus for a long moment. "We move now," I said. He nodded. "We move now." What happened in May month 6 of the investigation came faster than I had expected in terms of timing, though not in terms of substance. Derek filed an internal memo in mid-May, distributed to our entire 22-person team, stating that Ryan Foster was transitioning to an advisory role due to ongoing personal commitments outside the agency. There was no such transition. There were no such commitments. I read the memo on my phone while sitting in my office 5 feet from the person who had written it, listening to him explain to someone on the phone that the leadership transition was mutual and professionally managed. He smiled at me through my glass office wall while he talked. I waved back. The following week, Derek contacted Thomas Reed, Sterling Brand's vice president of marketing, a man Derek had met once at a trade show, and I had never introduced them formally, which is how I know Derek had been building this particular access point independently, and told Thomas that Prism Creative was under new leadership structure and that Ryan Foster's health-related absence had created some uncertainty about service continuity. He suggested the Sterling contract be renegotiated under revised terms that would formalize Derek's direct oversight. Catherine Park texted me that evening. "Did something happen? Thomas is asking questions about you. This doesn't feel right." I told her I knew. I asked her to document every contact from Derek with dates and times. The third escalation happened the week after that. And this one told me Derek had stopped being careful. He had been emailing 3 of our most significant former clients' companies that had moved their business to larger agencies in the previous 2 years from a new email address at a domain called Cole Creative Group.com, registered 3 weeks earlier. The emails described Prism as under restructuring and offered more flexible arrangements for companies interested in working with Derek directly. He was building the new entity while dismantling the existing one, migrating the goodwill and contact access that Prism had earned, that I had built into a vehicle he controlled entirely. Patricia called me when she found the domain registration. Her voice had a specific flatness that I had learned to read as the sound of a lawyer who has just found the thing that changes the legal strategy. "He's not trying to push you out gradually anymore," she said. "He's trying to walk away from Prism, entirely leave the investor debt attached to your name, and migrate the assets into the new entity. He needs to move faster because something has made him nervous." She paused. "We cannot wait any longer. I'm recommending we engage the Midwest Advertising Council's Ethics Committee and file the civil complaint within 10 days. I'm also recommending we make contact with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit, given the magnitude of the investor fraud." She paused again. "And we need to warn Jade Park before Derek moves the new financing documents in front of her." I said yes to all 3. Part 4 Twist. There is a moment in the middle of a long investigation when the picture you've been building stops being a series of separate problems and becomes a single shape. When you stop saying "and also" and start saying "because." That moment for me came on a Tuesday night in late May, when Patricia called to tell me what her forensic accountants had found in the reconstruction of Derek's broader financial history work that went back further than Prism, further than Marcus Chen, further than Chicago. Before Marcus, before Prism, before the Northwestern friend I had known for 15 years, or the version of him I had known, or believed I knew, there had been a man named Anthony Greer in Atlanta. A small video production company called Blue Ridge Media. Anthony had founded it in his late 20s and brought Derek in as a creative director who gradually accumulated co-founder status through a series of agreements Anthony hadn't read carefully. The pattern was identical. The amendment, the accounts, the client migration. And then, when Anthony finally understood what had happened and hired an attorney, he had been presented with a settlement offer. $40,000. Signed non-disclosure agreement. Walk away. Anthony had signed it. Patricia had found the settlement agreement in the public probate records of Anthony's former business partner, a separate person, now deceased, whose estate had filed the Greer-Cole dispute in civil court before the settlement was reached. One of those documents had survived the settlement's confidentiality provisions because it had been filed separately before the NDA was in place. 3 companies, 3 co-founders, a man in Atlanta who had taken $40,000 to go away and say nothing, a man in Austin who had refused the settlement and spent 4 years waiting. Me, in Chicago, 7 months into an investigation I had conducted while sitting in the same office as the person I was investigating. And right now, on a clock that was running down, Jade Park, I want to tell you clearly what I understood in that moment. Because I think the emotional core of this story lives here more than anywhere else. This was not a person who had been my friend, and then, under business pressure, made a bad decision. This was not a person who had let ambition override loyalty in one specific instance. This was a person who had built a system, a repeatable, deliberate mechanism for extracting value from people who trusted him enough to hand him administrative control of something they had built. He had done it in Atlanta. He had done it in Austin. He was doing it in Chicago. He had, in all likelihood, already identified who would come after Jade Park, because this was not improvisation. This was methodology. The man I had sat on the floor with at midnight eating pizza we couldn't afford, celebrating the first real client, that version of Derek Cole had either never existed or had existed only as a persona deployed to earn trust quickly enough that the trust could be monetized before the other person checked the D's in. Paperwork. I could not know which. I had stopped trying to know. What I knew was this. Anthony Greer had signed the NDA and gone silent, and Derek had gone to Austin. Marcus had refused to sign and gone silent in a different way, waiting, building a file, alone, and Derek had come to Chicago. I was in Chicago. And right now, 8 months in, Jade Park was in the same building I was in, sitting at a desk with a title that said senior partner and a governing document that said nothing of the kind. I called Marcus. I told him about Anthony Greer. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How many more do you think there are that we don't know about?" I said I didn't know. He said, "Then let's make sure there aren't any more after Jade." I want to tell you how we approach Jade Park, because I think about this part of the story differently than the rest. Patricia made contact with Jade directly. Without advance coordination with me, she felt it was cleaner legally if I wasn't present for the initial disclosure. She met Jade at a coffee shop near the Prism office on a Friday morning, introduced herself as an attorney, and laid the documents on the table. Patricia told me later that Jade had spent the first 15 minutes of the conversation convinced she was being presented with something she would find was not what it appeared to be. She kept turning pages looking for the alternative explanation. When she reached the investor loan agreement with what appeared to be her signature on it, an agreement she had not signed, she stopped turning pages. 3 minutes of silence. Patricia counted. Then Jade looked up and asked one question. "What do I need to do?" That is the sentence I think about most when I think about Jade Park. Not the anger or the grief or the processing, all of which came later and were entirely understandable. The first sentence, after 3 minutes of silence, was a question about how to move forward. She told me later that the 3 minutes of silence were her thinking. If I had not been warned, where would I be? In another year. She had started doing the math on what the next stage of Derek's sequence would have looked like for her. She didn't tell me the specific numbers she arrived at. She didn't have to. Part 5. Payoff. The Chicago Marketing and Advertising Industry Awards is an annual event held in June at the Radisson Blu Hotel on Michigan Avenue. 200 people in a ballroom. Black tie preferred, business formal accepted. Every significant agency in the Midwest sends someone. It is the kind of event that matters in a specific way, not globally, Not in any sense that would register beyond the industry, but in the exact rooms where people's reputations are currency, it matters completely. The Midwest Advertising Council presents 7 awards. That year, for the first time, they were presenting a distinction called Agency Leader of the Year, created to recognize contribution to industry growth and innovation. Derek had been nominated in March and had mentioned the nomination in every single team meeting since. Not every team meeting obnoxiously, but in the way that people mention things they consider inevitable and ease. A certainty that made the mention feel like confirmation of something already understood. The nomination was based on Prism Creative's growth numbers. Prism Creative's growth was, to a degree, I had stopped trying to calculate precisely. Built on my work. The campaigns, the clients, the awards on the lobby shelves that had both our names on them. Patricia contacted the Midwest Advertising Council's Ethics Committee on a Monday 10 days before the ceremony. The package she delivered included the forensic signature analysis, the ownership amendment with a full comparison to the original articles, the investor loan agreements with forensic notation, Marcus Chen's notarized affidavit, the draft civil complaint to be filed the following week, documentation of the client migration scheme, the Cole Creative Group domain registration, and a summary of the Anthony Greer situation, to the extent permitted by the surviving public records. She also included a brief letter from Jade Park. I was not in that meeting. Patricia told me it lasted 40 minutes, and that the ethics committee chair asked 3 questions. Was the forensic examination conducted by a certified examiner? Were the investors prepared to submit statements? And was the civil complaint being filed before or after the ceremony? Patricia said, before. The complaint was filed on Thursday. The ceremony was Friday. I arrived at the Radisson Blu at 6:45 p.m. I wore a dark gray suit because I don't own a tuxedo. The ballroom smelled like flowers and cologne and the specific ambient confidence of 200 people who had paid for the table. Marcus Chen flew in from Austin that morning. We had agreed. Don't arrive together. Don't make eye contact across the room. Don't approach each other until after the 5th award. He was at table 7, near the back, with people he knew from a previous industry conference in Minneapolis. Jade Park was at the Prism table, Derek's table. He had reserved 10 seats. He had told the team this was a celebration of everything we've built together. Gerald Pittman was in the room. Roy and Connie Marsh were in the room. Diane Osei from Verdant Capital Group was in the room. All 3 had been contacted by Patricia's office on Wednesday and informed, for the first time, that the loan agreements they had entered into were potentially fraudulent, that the co-borrower listed on those agreements had not authorized the debt and had no knowledge of the account where the funds had been deposited. Patricia had answered their questions calmly for an hour each. Gerald Pittman said, on the call with Patricia, before he hung up. I knew something was off when the paperwork came back. I should have asked more questions. He paused. I'll be there Friday. I was standing near the bar at the back of the ballroom at 7:15 when Derek walked in. Custom tuxedo, he had mentioned it twice in the previous week, which I now understood was not vanity but the specific behavior of a person who had decided to enjoy a moment they believed was imminent. He was with 2 account managers and our public relations director. He was moving through the room, the way he always moved through rooms. Unhurried. Purposeful. Each greeting a performance of being specifically, individually pleased to see that person. He saw me across the room. He waved. The wave of a person with nothing to worry about. I raised my glass. Smiled. The dinner was served at 7:30. I ate. I watched Derek at his table, animated, present. The version of himself he saved for rooms that were watching. He made a toast at his table that I could see but not hear. People raised their glasses. Jade Park raised her glass. She was wearing a dark blue dress and her hair was up and she looked, from 30 feet away, like someone who had dressed for a celebration. I knew that was intentional. She and I had not discussed what to wear that night, but I thought about it afterward, and understood that she had made a decision about how to be present in that room as herself, not diminished, not hiding, and I thought that was the right decision. At 8:15, during the third award presentation, I noticed Gerald Pittman checking his phone. He read something on the screen and then put the phone in his inside jacket pocket and sat very still for a moment. I recognized that stillness. I had felt it myself. He looked up at the stage, and his expression was the expression of a person who has just confirmed something they needed confirmed before the next part of the evening. The first 4 awards were presented between 7:30 and 8:45. I noticed things during this period that I had not expected to notice. The flowers at the center of each table were white and already beginning to drop petals. The 12 copper wire sculptures behind the stage, the arrow shapes Derek had personally commissioned and donated as the evening's centerpiece installation, in his way of putting his aesthetic signature on the room where he expected to be celebrated, caught the stage lights and threw angular shadows across the curtain. I had not known about the sculptures until I arrived. They were exactly the kind of thing Derek would commission. Dramatic, purposeful, built to be the backdrop of his own moment. I thought, you built the set for your own undoing, and you called it a gift to the industry. At 8:50, I excused myself from my seat and moved to the back of the room. At 9, Marcus Chen appeared beside me. I hadn't asked him to. He just appeared, quietly, the way resolution tends to appear after a long time building. We stood next to each other and didn't say anything. The 5th award was the Agency Leader of the Year. Gerald Sutton, the president of the Midwest Advertising Council, walked to the podium at 9:10. He was 63, had been in the industry since before I was in high school, and had a measured, formal quality that I had always found slightly intimidating at industry events. That night, standing at the podium, adjusting the microphone with the deliberate unhurriedness of someone who was choosing to take time before speaking, he had an expression I had never seen on him before. He said, "Before we present the Agency Leader of the Year award, I need to address a development that came to the council's attention earlier this week. 200 people. The specific collective stillness of a crowd receiving information it has not been prepared for. The Midwest Advertising Council has a responsibility to the integrity of this industry and to this recognition. On Monday, we received documented evidence concerning the nominated individual that required us to consult with legal counsel, review submitted materials, and make a determination about the status of this nomination." He paused. In the room, no one moved. The nomination of Derek Cole for Agency Leader of the Year has been withdrawn, pending the outcome of ongoing civil and criminal proceedings. On the screens behind the stage, the screens normally used to display winner headshots and sponsor logos. A statement from the council appeared in large white text on a dark background. 4 paragraphs. The words, "Business Fraud Investigation," appeared in the 2nd paragraph. The words, "Pending Federal Complaint," appeared in the 3rd. The council's seal was at the bottom. The room remained very still for a moment longer than felt natural. Then it began to shift, the specific cascading sound of 200 people beginning to absorb and process and turn to each other. Derek had stood up from his table. He was looking at the screen behind the stage. He was motionless in a way I had never seen him be motionless. Not the deliberate, performed stillness of someone making a point, but the absolute stillness of a system that has stopped processing. He turned around and looked to the back of the room. I was standing with Marcus Chen. Derek looked at us. Then he looked at Jade Park, seated 2 chairs to his left at his table, her hands folded, her eyes on the screen rather than on him. Then he looked at Gerald Pittman, at table 12. Gerald Pittman was looking back. Around Derek, the Prism table was doing the thing that people do when something catastrophic happens to someone they're seated next to at a formal event. The uncertain stillness of people deciding whether to stay or move, speak or be silent. The 2 account managers were looking at their phones. The PR director had stood up. The table's centerpiece cast white reflections across the tablecloth. Behind Derek, The 12 copper wire arrows caught the stage light and threw their angular shadows across the curtain, pointing nowhere in particular. Gerald Sutton had moved on, in the professional, continued voice of someone who had been given a job to do and was finishing it. The Agency Leader of the Year award will not be presented this evening. We will resume with the 6th award, the Campaign Excellence Distinction. I put down my glass. I walked toward the lobby exit. Marcus walked beside me. We went to the lobby and sat in 2 chairs near the window that looked over Michigan Avenue. It was raining lightly, the specific gray soft rain that Chicago does in early June, the city moving through it in the way that cities move through things continuously, without adjusting. Marcus said, "How do you feel?" I looked out at the street for a moment. At the headlights and the rain, and the ordinary Thursday night traffic that had no idea what had just happened in the ballroom behind us. "Like someone opened a window," I said. "That's all. Like someone just opened a window." He nodded. We sat there for a while without saying anything else. It wasn't a victory lap. It wasn't celebration. It was more like the feeling of setting down something very heavy that you've been carrying for so long you'd forgotten what your hands felt like without it. Part 6. What came after? Let me give you the numbers. Because I started with numbers, and the ending deserves them too. Within 60 days of the awards ceremony, Prism Creative was placed under receivership by order of the Northern District of Illinois Court, following the submission of Patricia's civil complaint on behalf of myself, Marcus Shen, and Jade Park. The receivership was ordered because the company's assets needed to be protected, while the court determined what portion of the investor debt constituted fraudulent obligation. The court found none of it was my obligation. The signatures were not mine. I had not authorized the debt. The investors' claims were reclassified as creditor claims against Derek Cole personally. Derek was named in 3 civil lawsuits, mine, Marcus's, and Jade's. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit opened a formal investigation. I want to be careful about what I say here, because the investigation was ongoing as of the time I'm recording this. I will say this. Patricia received confirmation of the inquiry's formal status. I will say that the specific nature of the allegations, the forged signatures, the investor fraud across multiple jurisdictions, the pattern of repeated conduct placed it in a category that the FBI takes seriously. I will not speculate beyond that. Derek Cole was suspended from the Midwest Advertising Council. This is a consequence that might sound modest if you've never worked in an industry where organizational membership functions as professional infrastructure. In the Midwest marketing world, the Midwest Advertising Council is the room where careers are built, where clients are introduced, where the peer validation that justifies rates and justifies trust is granted. Suspension from that body meant Derek could not participate in any affiliated events, could not be listed in any council publications, could not submit work to council-adjacent award programs, could not walk into a room in this industry, and be recognized as a peer by the people who were in it. The agency he had been building in parallel, Cole Creative Group, dissolved before it launched. The clients he had been quietly migrating were informed of the situation. Several of them returned their communications to Prism's receivership managers. Most of them chose to work with me directly in the interim period, before I launched the new company. Sterling Brands stayed. Catherine Park called the week after the awards ceremony. She said, "We were never actually considering leaving." I thanked her, and meant it more than I usually mean things. The settlement, I won't give you the full financial details, because portions are under confidentiality agreement. I will give you the part that mattered more to me than money. Derek Cole, through his attorneys, signed a written acknowledgement. It confirmed Ryan Foster was a 50% co-founder of Prism Creative from its inception. Ryan Foster had not authorized the ownership amendment. Ryan Foster had not authorized the investor loans. Ryan Foster had not voluntarily reduced his operational role. Ryan Foster had not suffered from any health condition affecting his work. The representations Derek had made to Sterling Brands to other clients, to Prism's team, and to the industry at large about Ryan Foster's status and health were false. His name was on the document. His attorneys' names were on the document. It had been filed with the court. I have a copy in my desk drawer. I have not looked at it since the day it arrived, but I know it's there. There's something I want to tell you about Marcus Chen, because his story is part of this one, and it doesn't end in the diner or the lobby or the awards ceremony. When we met in April at the West Loop Diner, over bad coffee and folders with matching tabs, Marcus told me something I've thought about almost every day since. He said that after Meridian Brand Labs collapsed after he'd spent 4 years building something and watched it disassemble in real time and ended up holding nothing but a file of documents that proved he was right and changed. Nothing. He had not been able to build anything new. He had done careful, small, defensive work, consulting jobs he could walk away from without losing something he'd made. He had not wanted to be in a position where trust was structurally required, because he didn't know how to give trust anymore without giving everything, and he didn't know how to give everything to someone without checking every document they put in front of him. And checking every document put in front of you was not what partners did. Not in the beginning. When the company was just 2 people in a room making something from nothing, that kind of vigilance required a different kind of relationship than friendship, and he couldn't figure out how to have one without the other. He said, "I didn't know how to build something without a partner, and I didn't know how to have a partner without trusting them completely. And I didn't know how to trust anyone completely anymore." I understood that exactly. In September, 11 months after the Thursday in the hallway, 4 months after the ceremony, Marcus Chen and I opened Watershed Creative in Chicago. 2 co-founders, equal partners, 50-50 in every governing document, which Patricia drafted and which we both read line by line and then read each other's reading of, because that's the kind of partnership we were capable of building now. Not because we'd learned to distrust each other, but because we'd learned that trust and verification are not opposites. They can live in the same document, in the same room, in the same company. 14 people from Prism followed us. Not because we asked all of them. We asked 6 of the senior people, and the word spread on its own. People know things in offices. They know who does the work. They know who comes back to the office at 6 in the morning after a bad pitch and figures out what went wrong. They know who stays until the campaign is right rather than until the client stops complaining. 14 people made a decision on their own, without us pressuring them, and showed up on the first Monday at a new office with boxes and plants and an unnecessary quantity of coffee equipment. Jade Park joined us as a founding partner. Her $150,000 was returned through the settlement process. She reinvested it. She is now our head of new business development. She reads contracts with a precision that I find both slightly intimidating and deeply reassuring. She is very good at her job, which she had always been good at. The title at Prism had been real, even if the ownership had not. I want to tell you about the Anthony Greer situation, because this is the part of the story that stays with me in a different way than the rest. We never found Anthony Greer in a way that allowed direct communication. His confidentiality agreement was airtight and he had relocated, and the contact Patricia's office made on his behalf received a decline on his behalf. We don't know where he is now. We don't know if he started something new after Blue Ridge Media, or if he stayed small and protected. We don't know if the $40,000 he took felt like survival or compromise, or simply like the only thing in front of him at a specific moment, in a specific office, when the alternative was a long legal fight against someone who had the resources and the patience to make it last. I think about Anthony Greer. I think about the fact that if he had not signed the settlement agreement, if he had refused, if he had built a file, if he had waited for a second person to come forward, then the Marcus Chen situation might have gone differently. And if that situation had gone differently, there might have been no Prism Creative at all, because Derek might have faced consequences in Austin and never made it to Chicago. The people who go first don't always get the payoff. Sometimes the payoff belongs to the people who come after. That's not a comfortable thought, but I think it's a true one. I think about Anthony Greer and hope that whatever he built after Blue Ridge was built on firmer ground, and that he found something worth building, and that somebody along the way told him he had been right. Let me tell you what I actually learned, because I owe you that. Not the version of the lesson that sounds clean in a summary. The version I live with. The thing Derek's scheme required, the foundational assumption on which everything else rested, was that I would rather believe in the partnership than verify it. And he was right about that. For 5 years, I chose the story over the evidence for 5 years. Not because I was naive in some general helpless way, but because checking Derek's work would have felt, to me, like evidence that I didn't trust him. And not trusting him would have felt like losing the thing that made the company possible in the first place. I had made trust into a structural element that I was afraid to examine because examining it felt like undermining it. I understand now that this is exactly what someone with a scheme like Derek's relies on. Not your carelessness. Your investment in the relationship. The more you value what you've built with someone, the less you want to look closely at the foundation, because looking closely at the foundation implies you're prepared for it to be wrong. Most people are not prepared for it to be wrong with someone they love. In the professional sense of that word, you can love your partnership and still read the amended articles. Those two things are not in conflict. I know that now. I didn't know it then. I also want to say something about patience that I think people misunderstand when they hear a story like this. Patience in a situation like mine was not waiting. Waiting is passive. Patience was making the active decision to continue moving at the pace required, rather than the pace I wanted. For 7 months, I went to work every day. I did the work. I attended meetings. I answered emails. I shook Derek's hand at the door every morning and said good morning, and meant it, because not meaning it would have shown, and showing it would have cost me the only advantage I had. Patience is doing everything you're supposed to do, at the pace it needs to be done, while knowing exactly where you're going and keeping that destination entirely to yourself. Derek thought my patience was evidence that I wasn't paying attention. He thought the willingness to trust, to defer, to let things run at their own speed, was the signature of someone who could be led. He had been right about that for 5 years. He had been right about it with Anthony Greer and Marcus Chen. He was wrong about it in the end, but only because something changed. I stopped choosing the story over the evidence. There is one more thing I want to say before I finish. It is about the lamp, the old navy blue lamp that I bought at a thrift store near Northwestern when I was 19, that has sat on every desk I've ever worked at, that I brought from the dorm room to the apartment, to the first Prism office to my car when I needed to think clearly. On the morning I moved into the Watershed Creative office, I carried it myself rather than putting it in the moving boxes. I put it on the corner of the desk in my new office and plugged it in, and it turned on with the same orange warm light it had given off for 17 years. I looked at it for a moment. I want to be honest about why I kept it. It would be a cleaner story if I said I kept it as a symbol of starting over, or of reclaiming something, or of leaving the past behind. But the truth is simpler and stranger than that. I kept it because it was in the room the first night Derek and I stayed at the office until 2 a.m., drawing a company on a napkin. It was in the room when we signed the original articles of incorporation. The real ones, the 50-50 ones. It was in the room for everything that was genuine before everything that wasn't. I kept it because I needed a reminder not of Derek, not of the betrayal, but of the specific person I was when I believed in something enough to build it from nothing. That person still exists. He just reads the paperwork now. I sat down at my desk. It was a Monday morning in October, 11 months after a Thursday afternoon in a hallway, when I stopped walking because of a man's posture through a glass wall. The city outside was doing what Chicago does in October gray. Low sky, the lake pressing its cold into every block. I opened my laptop. I started answering emails. But before I did, I sat for one more moment. I want to tell you about this moment. because it's the one I didn't expect. I had expected to feel something clean, victory, or closure, or the particular quiet that comes after a long, difficult thing has resolved. And there was some of that the window-opening feeling I had described to Marcus in the lobby. But there was also something else that I had not anticipated, and that I think is worth telling you about, because revenge stories rarely include it. I missed Derek. Not the version of Derek I had come to understand over 7 months of investigation. Not the person who had forged my signature or built a system for extracting value from people who trusted him. I missed the specific person I had believed him to be on the floor of a Wicker Park apartment at midnight, when we were 28 and scared and making something from nothing together. That person may never have existed, or he may have existed and then changed. Slowly, under pressure I hadn't seen and wouldn't have understood. I don't know. I have made peace with not knowing, which took longer than I expected, and which I think is the actual work of this kind of story, not the gathering of evidence, or the coordination of legal strategy, or the timing of a public confrontation. The actual work is accepting that the grief and the justice can coexist, that you can be entirely right about what happened and still mourn what you thought you had. I think about Marcus Chen's 4 years of waiting, careful and alone. I think about what it costs to keep a file instead of building a life. I think about Jade Park's 3 minutes of silence in a coffee shop, running the math on what the next year would have cost her. I think about Anthony Greer in Atlanta, wherever he is, and the $40,000 that bought him silence and nothing else. And I think about the specific decision I made in a parking structure outside a county recorder's office after reading a document that told me the company I had helped build was 70% someone else's on paper. I had a choice in that moment: to grieve immediately, to confront immediately, to walk away immediately. Instead, I chose something slower and harder. I chose to understand first. Understanding first is the specific thing that made the difference. Not because it gave me more ammunition, though it did, eventually, but because it prevented me from taking an action that Derek had anticipated and prepared for. He had a response ready for an angry confrontation. He had lawyers ready for a disorganized accusation. What he did not have ready for was someone who spent 7 months building a case so complete that by the time the confrontation happened, there was no response that could change the outcome. I do not think patience makes you right. I think it makes you prepared. And being prepared in a situation where the person on the other side has been running their plan for longer than you've been aware of it is the only meaningful advantage you have. The lamp was on. The city was gray. The emails were waiting. 14 people had chosen to be in the room down the hall. Sterling Brands had chosen to stay. Jade Park had walked into a meeting that could have broken her and asked what she needed to do. Marcus Chen had flown from Austin and stood beside me in a hotel lobby without being asked. Patricia Holt had spent 9 months building a case that would have taken most lawyers twice as long. None of those people owed me anything. They had each made a choice, independently, based on something they understood to be true, about the work, about the situation, about what mattered. That is a different kind of partnership than the one I had with Derek. It doesn't require the other person to have been your friend for 15 years, or to have slept on the same air mattress, or to have shared the specific silence of people who have made something work. It requires only that everyone in the room has chosen to be there for reasons they can stand behind. That was the beginning. Not the end, not the resolution, not the moment where everything was settled and understood. Just the beginning, which is always what comes after the ending of the wrong thing. All events and characters in this story are fictional and presented for entertainment and reflection. Prism Creative, Watershed Creative, Derek Cole, Ryan Foster, Marcus Chen, Jade Park, Anthony Greer, Patricia Holt, and all related individuals, entities, and events are fictional constructs. Any resemblance to real persons, entities, or events is coincidental. This story does not constitute legal or financial advice. If you believe you are experiencing business fraud, please consult a qualified attorney.